Now, extreme heat is one of many factors that makes Asia the most disaster-prone continent in the world. Now, that is according to a new report by the World Meteorological Organization. Last year, extreme weather events across the region killed 2,000 people and affected millions. This latest report warns climate change is intensifying the severity of climate disasters. Floods, the melting of glaciers, along with extreme heat, remain the major threats in Asia. And Bangladesh is one of the countries most vulnerable to the impact of the climate crisis. It's currently facing its longest heat wave in 75 years.
No windows and a cramped space. The stove quickly heats up Romana Islam's kitchen. And with a temperature of around 40 degrees in Dhaka, her small apartment is stifling.
Every year, summer comes, but the heat has become too much in the last few years. Especially this year, it's unbearable. I can't stand by the stove when I cook. I don't feel like cooking, but I have to because I have children. I sweat when I cook. My head starts spinning. I feel like falling to the ground.
The modest family cannot afford air conditioning, and fans provide little relief in the scorching heat.
My children can't sleep. They are restless due to the heat wave. When there's a power outage, I need to fan them with a homemade fan, and they often become sick.
Bangladesh is in the grip of a heat wave, directly affecting the livelihood of many residents.
Due to the heat, I can barely keep my eyes open in the sun. I feel like leaving everything and returning to my village, but I know it's not practical. It feels better to sit in the shade of a tree. I can't work much in this situation.
Situated on the world's largest delta, the Ganges, Bangladesh's unique geography makes it vulnerable to extreme weather events. And even though it emits less than 1% of global greenhouse gases, Bangladesh is among the most affected by climate change. The government spends roughly 7% of its annual budget on climate adaptation. International assistance falls far short of the country's needs. Many turn to their faith to deal with the disastrous consequences, like these worshippers praying for rain.
And we can get more on this from DW reporter Binish Javid. Hi, Binish. So we saw in your report there the effects on one particular family in Bangladesh of the changing climate. Give us a sense of how Bangladesh as a whole is being affected.
Anya, Bangladesh has been on the front lines of climate change for decades. The country has been repeatedly hit by cyclones, by heat waves, by droughts and by floods. In just last 20 years, the country has been hit by around 200 extreme weather events. And these weather events have caused damage to livelihoods, have destroyed homes, have displaced millions of people. There are people in Bangladesh who in their life have been displaced multiple times because of weather-related incidents. So the country has been fighting climate change for a long time. And as if it's mentioned in the report that it currently invests 7% of its annual budget on climate change. So at the micro level, we see devastation to people's lives, but also at macro level, the country is incurring huge economic losses to fight climate change.
OK, so people are being severely affected in their everyday lives. As you said, Bangladesh does already spend a significant portion of its budget on climate adaptation. Can you explain to our viewers who may not sort of be familiar with that term? So what does that actually mean?
Anya, Bangladesh is considered a world leader when it comes to climate adaptation and resilience. And there is a reason for this. In 1970, when Bangladesh was part of Pakistan, the region was hit by a cyclone that killed almost 500,000 people. So in 1971, when Bangladesh was created, the country was forced to invest into mechanisms to protect its people. And Bangladesh has, for over years, invested in developing strong early warning systems. So, for example, in the local mosques, in the local communities, people are given alerts, timely alerts, so that they can evacuate if a cyclone is approaching. They have established thousands of shelters where people, along with their cattle, livestock, can go because they want to prevent livelihoods of people. The country has also invested in indigenous solutions. So they are involving local communities to come up with indigenous solutions. So, but as I've mentioned, that the impacts of climate change are so intense that the current policies are not enough. If Bangladesh invests 7% of its annual budget, it needs 7 times the money to sustain these policies, which, of course, for a developing country is very difficult.
So from what you're saying, Bangladesh is doing an excellent job at adapting to the changing climate. It's investing a lot of money, but it's not nearly enough. So the question, of course, is, should the international community, what role should the international community be playing to help Bangladesh, not to mention other vulnerable countries, in the same situation?
Anya, the rich, industrialized countries that are responsible for majority of greenhouse gases and emissions are not doing their part. They have pledged $700 million at the UN Climate Conference. That's a fraction of what these countries need. I'll give an example of Pakistan. Just the floods of 2022 Pakistan incurred losses of $33 billion. So for these countries, and annually, Bangladesh needs $3 billion just to restructure, rehabilitate after a climate disaster. So these countries need massive amounts of money, and the international community, the pledges are very discouraging, and also the pledges are in form of loans. And these countries already are in dire economic situations, and therefore these countries ask for climate justice, ask for climate grants, and that the international community or the Western countries, industrialized countries, when they are responsible for emissions, then they also need to take into account that they are responsible to help developing countries fight climate change.
Beenish Javed, DW reporter. Beenish, thank you so much for that.
Let's get more with Mizan Khan. He's a climate change expert who's written extensively about the politics of climate change. He joins me now from Dhaka. Welcome, Mr. Khan. What is driving this heat wave in Bangladesh?
Yeah, thank you. As you already mentioned, climate change is a global phenomenon. Bangladesh, I regard as a nano emitter, emitting less than 1%, as you already mentioned. So this global phenomenon has been exacerbated by also the national level developments. For example, Dhaka. Bangladesh is a Dhaka-centric, capital-centric country, and we have huge problems of urbanization, very, very rapid urbanization. And there is absolute lack of urban forestry, for example, and then filling of water bodies, lakes and water bodies for real estate development. Bangladesh is a very small country, so environmental, this climate havocs happen because of twin pressures, rapid, very rapid economic growth of 6 to 7% a year, as well as we are having. For example, concretization, huge concretization in Dhaka city with lack of greenery. We have only 3 to 4% of greenery in Dhaka city, which is not sufficient. That is what causing the heat island effect in Dhaka city. But this is not just a problem in Dhaka, all over South Asia, in India, Pakistan, right, or even in other Asian countries, in Philippines. Right. So what is happening is that we are not doing the mitigation, the ultimate solution of climate change in terms of reduction of right, greenhouse gases. And this needs to be exacerbated,
What would you say is the responsibility of the government here? Because you talked about concretization, you talked about all these buildings coming up and all these heat islands being created. What is the government doing here to mitigate the effects on temperature from all this work?
Yeah, government, in fact, we have a national NDC, what we call nationally determined contributions, where government has got a plan of reduction of 22% of our emissions by 2030. We also have the national adaptation plans. And all over Bangladesh, we have a government has initiated a huge program of afforestation. But in Dhaka city, we have kind of different types of problems in the sense that most densely, one of the most densely populated cities in the on earth, and then lack of space, open space for greenery, lack of water bodies. Water bodies had been there before, but government is trying to kind of reclaim the encroached lands from the land grabbers, for example. There has been some success in recovering the lands where
Right.
government can raise plantations and promote urban forestry. And there are programs for that. But this is not just the solution from Bangladesh to come. We need international support. As you mentioned already, the 7% of our annual development plan is spent, but that is not sufficient at all. We need investments in billions of dollars. Bangladesh is now have $6 to $7 billion of shortage of climate investment. So
Right.
once we get more benefit and more support, then I think things can turn better.
We'll leave it there for the time being, but thank you so much for joining us today, Mizan Khan, speaking to us from Dhaka. Thanks so much, sir.
Thank you.